All right. Thanks for joining us, watching us, or tuning in, however you're finding us, either on the HRN News at 7 or maybe on social media or on the healthylife.net news channel, YouTube channel. I'm Jay Cruz, and joining me today is Randy Kritkausky, and this is our series with the Healthy Life radio hosts and going through some tips and solutions to kind of stay calm, positive, and focused during these challenging times that we're all experiencing here in the country, on the planet, and maybe even out of the planet if we've seen some of those things from the James Webb Telescope. Randy, thanks for joining us today with our talk.
Thanks for the invite.
You're very welcome. Randy Kritkausky has a show, Indigenous Perspectives, that runs on the fourth Thursday each month here on healthylife.net. It's 12 noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. And Randy's joining us today to kind of offer his insight with some of the work he does, his background on what we can do to kind of navigate these interesting times.
So maybe I should just remind listeners that, I am a tribal member, Potawatomi enrolled tribal member. Like many people who are Native Americans legally, I'm probably not your classic spitting image of the Hollywood actor who, played the role of an Indian in a movie and who was actually an Italian actor. But to get to the point, I've discovered in the last 5 to 7 years, my Native American heritage. It was always sort of subterranean, rumbling in the background, but it burst forth, and it's given me an enormous amount of hope, even in these very difficult times. And I routinely deal with issues like climate change. That's part of the full-time job I used to have as an environmental organization executive. So I'm not naive about what we're up against. But I think if there's any message I want to deliver today, it's that there's reason to be hopeful, as opposed to being, feeling defeated and helpless.
Yeah, I think with climate change, there's still one side of the room that thinks the planet's been going through changes for billions of years. And there's another side of the room with maybe some data going, well, it has been changing, but these new changes are quite alarming. And we haven't faced some of the climate change that we're facing now in the last couple years for sure, and the last 10 or 20 years, in many people's recent memory. So it's definitely something that may or may not have been happening for billions of years. I wasn't here. I've only been here since the late 60s or what have you. But I think it's something even some of the doubters or people that were saying it necessarily wasn't here, the evidence is really startling in the amount that's really here, and it's time to really get on the same page.
Yeah, the challenge for me as an Indigenous person is not so much trying to change the minds of climate change deniers. That's a really difficult task. The challenge that I'm facing up to and trying to work on is within the community of people who are not deniers, who are open to the seriousness of the threat that we're dealing with. Is within that community, there are a lot of people just throwing up their hands, and I won't use the words they use. I think we've all heard them multiple times over the coffee table,
right?
Basically saying, we're doomed to extinction. There's nothing we can do to fix it, and Mother Nature is punishing us. And I just want to say that from a Native American perspective, which is a little bit longer than the last 20 or 30 years that we've been thinking about this issue, as you said, climate change has been coming and going for a long time, and we came to this hemisphere during an ice age. And we've experienced climate change by being forced very often from woodland forests, where my ancestors came from, and being forced westward into the prairie and eventually into the arid Southwest. So we know all about climate change, and we know that it's painful, but we can endure it and we can adapt. And more importantly, I think we have enough faith and confidence in Mother Earth to realize that she is trying to heal. And what we need to do is cooperate in that healing process. She's not punishing us, which I often hear. She's actually extending a helping hand, and I see evidence of it every day in things large and small. And people are so relieved to hear that message, to hear that we aren't necessarily relegated to the trash bin. It's not over and done with.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly always hope as long as we, keep that hope alive. And there are a lot of people who just feel we're at the 11th hour, 58th minutes, and just bring on the doomsday party, which I'm not ready to hit the doomsday button. We have a lot of opportunities to change things. It might not be comfortable in what we do to contribute to maybe doing our small part, but I think if we all start small in our circle of people, our communities, we can make changes, whether it's in your home, your town, your even your city block, or communities, and it could have a residual effect. So I think by leading by example and doing some changes that way is the best way to really kind of move forward, instead of going out and convincing someone and maybe grabbing a club from the Stone Age that was there at the Ice Age or whatever, and beating people over the head. That doesn't work. So how are some of the ways you're able to bring the need for change, or lead by example for some change with that, Randy?
Well, astonishingly, the most productive thing that I find myself doing in our radio show and in my writing is giving permission to people to have a spiritual connection with Mother Earth. And I'm talking everybody from, hard-nosed scientists, who are ecologists and biologists, to, the person in the street who simply is kind of curious about this Native American spiritual connection to nature. And what I do is I simply tell them stories, that have happened to me in my life. And the one that's most immediately available today, because I'm working on a sculpture to commemorate it, is a garden that I planted, a Native American Vermont corn and squash garden in my front yard. And when I did it, a few days later, the most incredible thing happened. I looked out the window during one of those rainstorms in the front yard, and it's, in the backyard, it's sunny. And there was a rainbow that came down and touched the ground right where we had planted the garden. And I didn't know rainbows could do that. And fortunately, I had a witness, so people won't accuse me of hallucinating or making up stories. So, I thought, my gosh, somebody's sending us a message. This is like heaven touching earth, saying, there's hope. There's a pot of maybe not gold, but there's a pot of hope and growth and renewal at the end of the rainbow. Well, that's not the end of the story. About 3 months later, we had another sun shower, as we call them. I looked out the window thinking, I wonder if this is ever going to happen again. Lo and behold, the rainbow touched the ground in the same place. Again, I had a witness. So, I was actually perplexed. I was shaken. And then when it happened the third time, again, I had a witness. I have to say I was completely blown away. Wow. But I got the message, and the message was Mother Earth sending a message, which is, how many times do we have to tell you there are connections that are deeper and more hopeful and wonderful than most of the time you take the time in your own life to recognize. So when I tell people this, they'll say something like, I've had experiences like that, but if I tell my family, they'll think I'm nuts. Or if they're a scientist, they'll say, if I write about that, I'm out of the profession. We can't do that. So I feel my work is giving the American public and public across the world that listens to our show the chance and the opportunity to have those kinds of connections. They are going to be what keep us going in these difficult times.
That's I get goosebumps just hearing that. I mean, obviously, planting a garden is a great thing, a great way to get back in touch with nature, and in these times, save a little bit of money on growing some fresh organic vegetables or what have you. But seeing something like that 3 times, if that's not a complete message from spirits, to really put an emphasis on what you're doing and remind us, maybe we need to take more time, think from the heart, and think about Mother Earth and the planet when we do some of these things, and think for the future how it could be affecting issues like climate change. Are we doing something that's going to help or hurt the planet? And if it's going to hurt the planet, maybe we should think again before we proceed with doing that, whether that's I don't know if that's the kind of car you drive, other things you use, to heat the house and stuff like that. There's obviously a lot of things that we really don't have time for today. Randy, I want to thank you so much for joining us on these quick bit and offering some tips and hints and solutions to climate change and many of the other things we're doing positive. And getting out to nature, I think, is certainly a great tip for all of us, but getting out there with intention, and becoming one with Mother Earth, possibly. Is that a good way to kind of take it away?
That is, and I have to say, your show and your theme, on the positive side, is something we hearken back to frequently because we have to remind ourselves as well. Love the work you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you very much, Randy. And again, you can hear Indigenous Perspectives. It's available 24/7 on podcast on demand here at healthylife.net. And the next show will be coming up on the 28th. Is your next show, or is it the 26th? It's 2 weeks. It's the fourth Thursday each and every month, and it's 12 noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And so happy to have you and all the work that Carolyn does with the show as well. Randy Kritkausky, thanks for joining us on healthylife.net today for these talks.
Miigwech, thank you.